In the heart of a bustling city where skyscrapers touched the clouds and people moved like ants on a mission, there was a massive office building. This wasn't just any ordinary workplace. It was the headquarters of one of the largest tech companies in the world. Every day, hundreds of employees streamed in and out, their faces glued to laptops or smartphones, their minds racing with deadlines and projects. Among these busy workers was Sarah, an administrative assistant who had been with the company for 5 years. She wasn't someone who stood out in a crowd. She didn't have flashy clothes or a booming voice that commanded attention. Instead, Sarah was known for her quiet dedication, always arriving early and staying late, often working double shifts without complaint. Her colleagues admired her work ethic but rarely thought beyond what they saw at the office. They didn't know much about her life outside those glass walls. Sarah had taken on extra responsibilities after her husband Mark lost his job unexpectedly. Mark used to be a skilled carpenter, crafting beautiful furniture that people loved. But when a severe injury left him unable to work, everything changed. Medical bills piled up, savings dwindled, and soon, the couple found themselves struggling to make ends meet. Despite the challenges, Sarah refused to let her personal struggles affect her performance at work. She believed that showing up every day, giving her best effort, and keeping her head down would somehow pull her family through this difficult time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the office floor, most employees had already left for the day. The hum of computers and printers had faded into silence, leaving only the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Michael Reynolds, the CEO of the company, was still in his corner office. Known for his sharp suits and even sharper mind, Michael was a man who prided himself on efficiency and results. But tonight, something felt different. As he gathered his things to leave, he heard muffled voices coming from the break room. Curious, Michael paused and listened more closely. He recognized the soft tones of Sarah's voice. She was talking on the phone, her words barely audible over the distant hum of the vending machine. "Yes, I'm sorry to bother you," she said hesitantly. "Do you think maybe you could spare some groceries? Just a few things. I promise I'll pay you back next week." Michael froze mid-step, his briefcase dangling loosely in his hand. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sarah, the same woman who handled countless tasks with grace and precision, was asking someone, likely a neighbor or friend, for food. There was no anger or frustration in her tone, just a quiet desperation that tugged at Michael's heartstrings. He stood there for a moment longer, unsure of what to do. Should he intervene? Offer help directly? Or respect her privacy and walk away? Ultimately, Michael chose the latter. He quietly slipped out of the office, his mind swirling with thoughts about Sarah. How had he not noticed her struggles before? Was she really in such dire straits that she had to ask strangers for basic necessities? These questions lingered in his mind as he drove home, the city lights blurring past his car window. The next morning, Michael arrived at the office earlier than usual. He couldn't shake off the image of Sarah making that call, determined to understand more. He began paying closer attention to her actions throughout the day. During lunchtime, he observed her packing leftovers from the cafeteria into a small container. When a coworker asked casually why she wasn't eating with everyone else, Sarah simply smiled and replied, "Oh, I'm taking it home for dinner." Her response seemed innocent enough, but to Michael it carried a deeper meaning. Later that afternoon, while reviewing employee files in preparation for an upcoming meeting, Michael stumbled upon Sarah's record. It listed her years of service, performance reviews, and salary history. What caught his eye was how little her pay had increased since she started. Despite her loyalty and contributions, she hadn't received significant raises, likely because she never demanded them. Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He realized that Sarah wasn't alone. There were probably dozens, if not hundreds, of employees silently struggling just like her. That evening, as Michael prepared to leave the office, he noticed Sarah once again putting in extra hours. She sat hunched over her desk, typing furiously, her face illuminated by the glow of her computer screen. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Sarah gave him a polite nod before returning to her work. Michael nodded back. but inside he felt conflicted. Here was a woman who gave so much to the company, yet received so little in return. Something needed to change, but he wasn't sure where to start. Over the next few weeks, Michael made it a point to observe Sarah more closely, not out of suspicion but out of genuine concern. He noticed subtle signs of strain, dark circles under her eyes, worn-out shoes and clothes that looked faded from countless washes. Despite these hardships, Sarah continued to volunteer for additional tasks, stay late to assist others, and maintain a positive attitude. Yet there was an underlying sadness in her demeanor that Michael couldn't ignore. One Friday afternoon, during a casual conversation with HR, Michael learned that Sarah rarely took vacation days. When asked why, she always cited personal reasons and brushed off further inquiries. This revelation struck a chord with Michael. He began to wonder how many other employees were silently sacrificing their well-being for the sake of the company. And more importantly, what could he, as the CEO, do to address these invisible burdens? Determined to find answers, Michael decided to take matters into his own hands. He resolved to visit Sarah's neighborhood unannounced, hoping to see firsthand where she lived and gain a better understanding of her circumstances. Little did he know, this decision would lead to a discovery that would not only change Sarah's life but also transform the entire culture of the company. The moment Sarah opened her apartment door to find Michael Reynolds standing there, she felt a mix of emotions: shock, embarrassment, and a flicker of fear. What could the CEO possibly want with her? She didn't know whether to invite him in or politely ask him to leave. But something about his demeanor put her at ease. He wasn't dressed in his usual sharp suit. Instead, he wore casual clothes that made him seem less intimidating. In his hands, he held a brown paper bag filled with groceries, a gesture so unexpected it left her momentarily speechless. "Hi, Sarah," Michael said gently, sensing her unease. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I just wanted to check in, see how things are going." Sarah hesitated for a second before stepping aside and gesturing for him to enter. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds. Please come in." Her voice was calm, but her heart raced as she closed the door behind him. The last thing she expected on a quiet Saturday morning was a visit from her boss, let alone the CEO of the entire company. As Michael stepped inside, he took in the details of the small apartment. It was modest but clean, with every inch of space used efficiently. A faded couch sat against one wall, its cushions patched with duct tape, while a hand-me-down coffee table held a stack of children's books and crayons. Toys were scattered across the floor, evidence of Sarah's two young kids who were likely out playing with neighbors. The faint aroma of reheated soup lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of fabric softener from freshly washed clothes hanging near the window. Despite the lack of luxury, there was warmth in the space, a sense of care and effort. Hand-drawn pictures decorated the walls, adding splashes of color to the otherwise plain room. On the windowsill sat a small potted plant, its leaves reaching toward the sunlight streaming through the glass. It was clear that Sarah did everything she could to make the best of what little she had. Michael tried to keep the conversation light, complimenting her cozy home and asking about her children. "Your kids must be wonderful," he said, glancing at the drawings pinned to the wall. "They're very talented artists." Sarah smiled faintly, pride shining through her tired eyes. "Thank you. They're my world. Sometimes it's tough, but we manage." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken struggles. Michael nodded, his gaze drifting to the kitchen counter where a stack of unpaid bills lay. Their envelopes were creased from being opened and reopened, each one bearing reminders of overdue payments. Nearby, an old refrigerator hummed loudly, its surface adorned with magnets holding up notes and grocery lists. One note in particular caught his attention. "Stretch every dollar. God will provide." For a moment, Michael found himself at a loss for words. Here was a woman who gave so much to the company, yet lived paycheck to paycheck, stretching every resource to its limits. He couldn't imagine how stressful it must be to juggle work, family, and financial pressures without breaking down. Yet, Sarah carried it all with grace and dignity, never letting her burden show at the office. "I won't take up too much of your time," Michael said finally, settling into a chair at the cramped dining table. "But I wanted to thank you for everything you do for the company. You're an incredible asset, and I hope you know how much your work is valued." Sarah looked surprised, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. That means a lot coming from you." There was no bitterness in her tone, only gratitude and perhaps a hint of relief that her secret hadn't been met with judgment. Still, Michael sensed there was more beneath the surface. He decided to probe gently, hoping to understand the full extent of her challenges. "I noticed you've been working double shifts lately," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "Is everything okay? If there's anything you need, if there's anything the company can do to support you, I want you to feel comfortable speaking up." Sarah hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of a chipped mug on the table. For years she had kept her struggles private, fearing that admitting weakness might make her appear unreliable or unworthy of her position. But something about Michael's sincerity encouraged her to open up. "It's not easy," she admitted softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Mark, he's my husband. He got injured a couple of years ago. He used to be a carpenter, but now he can't work anymore. We've had medical bills piling up and, well, it's been hard to keep up with everything. I try not to let it affect my job because I love what I do, but sometimes—" Her voice trailed off and she quickly wiped away a tear that had escaped. Down her cheek, Michael listened intently, his chest tightening with each word. He had suspected Sarah was struggling, but hearing her story firsthand painted a vivid picture of the sacrifices she made daily. She worked tirelessly to provide for her family, often skipping meals or cutting corners to save money. Despite her hardships, she remained committed to her role at the company, never once complaining or asking for help. "You shouldn't have to go through this alone," Michael said firmly, his tone compassionate yet resolute. "No one should, especially someone who contributes as much as you do." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I appreciate that, Mr. Reynolds, I really do. But I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me. I'm doing the best I can." Michael admired her resilience, but he also recognized the toll it was taking on her. The weight of responsibility rested heavily on her shoulders, and it was clear she needed support, not pity. Before leaving, he promised her two things. First, that his visit would remain confidential, unless she chose to share it. Second, that changes were coming, not just for her, but for everyone facing similar challenges within the company. As he walked back to his car, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. Seeing Sarah's reality firsthand had opened his eyes to the invisible struggles faced by so many employees. Now it was up to him to make a difference. Over the next few weeks, Michael found himself unable to stop thinking about Sarah. The image of her quietly asking for help stayed with him, gnawing at his conscience. He had built a reputation as a driven and successful CEO, someone who valued efficiency, innovation, and results. But now he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something important. Success wasn't just about numbers on a balance sheet or accolades in the press. It was also about the people who made those achievements possible. Determined to understand more, Michael began observing Sarah from afar, not out of mistrust but out of concern. He noticed things he hadn't paid attention to before. Every morning she arrived at the office promptly at 7:30 a.m., even though her shift officially started at 9. She always carried a reusable water bottle and a small lunchbox, which she refilled with leftovers from the cafeteria whenever possible. Her desk was neat and organized, with sticky notes lining the edges of her monitor detailing tasks she needed to complete. Despite her workload, she never seemed flustered or overwhelmed. In fact, she often offered to help others when they were swamped, staying late to ensure projects were finished on time. What struck Michael most, however, were the subtle signs of strain. Sarah's clothes, while clean and pressed, looked faded and worn, as if they'd been washed one too many times. Her shoes, once polished and sturdy, now bore scuffs and cracks along the soles. And then there were her eyes. Dark circles lingered beneath them, betraying long nights spent working or worrying. Yet, Despite these visible markers of exhaustion, Sarah remained cheerful and professional, greeting everyone with a warm smile and a kind word. One afternoon, during a company-wide meeting, Michael watched as Sarah took meticulous notes, jotting down action items and deadlines with precision. When another employee raised a question about an upcoming project, Sarah chimed in with clarity and insight, offering solutions that impressed even the senior managers. It was moments like these that reminded Michael why Sarah was such a valuable asset to the team. She didn't just punch a clock. She poured her heart into her work, going above and beyond what was expected of her. But as much as Michael admired her dedication, he couldn't ignore the growing unease in his gut. Why was someone as talented and hard-working as Sarah still struggling? Shouldn't her efforts have translated into better opportunities by now? These questions led him to dig deeper. Later that week, while reviewing employee records for an unrelated initiative, Michael came across Sarah's file. It contained standard information: her hire date, performance reviews, salary history, and benefits enrollment. As he scanned the document, one detail stood out: the stagnation in her pay. Sarah's starting salary 5 years ago had been modest but fair given her role. However, over the years, her raises had been minimal, barely keeping pace with inflation. While annual bonuses helped cushion the blow slightly, they weren't enough to significantly improve her financial situation. Michael frowned as he compared her compensation to that of other employees in similar roles. Many of them had received promotions or substantial increases after demonstrating consistent performance. Why hadn't Sarah? The answer, Michael realized, lay partly in her own humility. Sarah wasn't the type to demand recognition or push for advancement. She believed that hard work would eventually speak for itself, trusting that her contributions would be noticed without her having to ask. Unfortunately, in a fast-paced corporate environment where self-promotion often played a key role in career growth, this approach left her overlooked. As Michael closed the file, his mind raced with thoughts. Was Sarah's case unique? Or were there others like her within the company? How many employees were silently bearing burdens they didn't feel comfortable sharing? These questions weighed heavily on him, prompting him to take action, but not through official channels. Something inside him urged him to see for himself, to step outside the confines of his executive suite and witness the reality of Sarah's life beyond the office walls. On a chilly Saturday morning, Michael decided to visit Sarah's neighborhood. Armed with a bag of groceries he'd picked up on the way, he parked his car several blocks away from her address to avoid drawing attention. Clutching the bag tightly, he walked toward her apartment building, his polished leather shoes clicking against the pavement. The contrast between his surroundings and the sleek skyscrapers downtown was stark. Here, buildings showed signs of wear and tear, peeling paint, rusted railings, and cracked sidewalks. Children played on makeshift basketball courts, their laughter echoing through the air while laundry hung from lines stretched between windows. When Michael reached Sarah's building, he hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was the right thing to do. Knocking on an employee's door unannounced felt intrusive, yet he couldn't turn back. Taking a deep breath, he climbed the stairs to her unit and knocked gently. After a few seconds, the door opened, revealing Sarah standing there, wide-eyed and stunned. "Mr. Reynolds?" she stammered, clearly caught off guard. For a split second, Michael worried she might slam the door in his face. Instead, she stepped aside awkwardly, inviting him in. "Please, come in," she said softly, her voice tinged with nervousness. Inside, the tiny one-bedroom apartment was immaculately clean but sparsely furnished. A threadbare couch sat against one wall, its cushions patched with duct tape. Toys scattered across the floor hinted at children, and the faint aroma of reheated soup lingered in the air. Michael's gaze drifted to the kitchen, where mismatched plates and utensils were neatly stacked beside a humming refrigerator. On the counter lay a stack of unpaid bills, their envelopes creased from being opened and reopened. Despite the modest conditions, there was warmth in the space, a sense of care and effort. Hand-drawn pictures decorated the walls, likely created by Sarah's kids. A small potted plant sat on the windowsill, its leaves reaching toward the sunlight streaming through the glass. It was clear that Sarah did everything she could to make the best of what little she had. Michael tried to keep the conversation light, complimenting her cozy home and asking about her children. "They're wonderful," Sarah replied, a flicker of pride lighting up her tired eyes. "Sometimes it's tough, but we manage." As they sat together at the cramped dining table, Michael struggled to find the right words. He wanted to express his admiration for her resilience, but he also didn't want to embarrass her. Finally, he settled on a simple statement. "I'm truly grateful for everything you do for the company, Sarah. You're an incredible asset, and I hope you know how much your work is valued." Sarah nodded, smiling faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. That means a lot." There was no bitterness in her tone, only gratitude, and perhaps a hint of relief that her secret hadn't been met with judgment. Before leaving, Michael promised Sarah 2 things. First, that his visit would remain confidential unless she chose to share it. Second, that changes were coming, not just for her, but for everyone facing similar challenges within the company. As he walked back to his car, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. Seeing Sarah's reality firsthand had opened his eyes to the invisible struggles faced by so many employees. Now it was up to him to make a difference. Michael's visit to Sarah's apartment left an indelible mark on him. As he drove away from her neighborhood, the images of her modest home replayed in his mind: the worn-out furniture, the stack of unpaid bills, and the note taped to the fridge that read, "Stretch every dollar, God will provide." It wasn't just a glimpse into Sarah's life. It was a wake-up call about the realities faced by employees who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often unnoticed and underappreciated. The next day at work, Michael found himself distracted. He couldn't focus on meetings or emails because his thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah's story. Her words echoed in his ears. "I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me. I'm doing the best I can." That quiet determination struck a chord deep within him. How many others like Sarah were silently carrying burdens far heavier than they should have to bear? And what kind of leader was he if he hadn't even noticed? Determined to understand the scope of the problem, Michael began digging deeper. He requested anonymized data from HR about employee compensation, overtime hours, and benefits usage. What he discovered shocked him. While the company prided itself on being progressive and innovative, its policies weren't as supportive as they claimed. Many employees, especially those in administrative roles, were grossly underpaid compared to industry standards. Some had taken on second jobs or worked excessive overtime just to make ends meet. Others relied heavily on food banks or emergency assistance programs outside of work. One statistic stood out starkly. Nearly 40% of the company's workforce lived paycheck to paycheck. These weren't lazy or unmotivated individuals. They were hardworking people contributing daily to the success of the organization. Yet their efforts went largely unrecognized, and their struggles remained hidden beneath a facade of professionalism. Michael knew something had to change, not just for Sarah but for everyone. But how could he address such systemic issues without causing disruption or backlash? Corporate culture often resisted radical shifts, and some board members might view these changes as unnecessary expenses. Still, Michael believed that investing in employees wasn't charity, it was smart business. Happy, supported workers performed better, stayed longer, and fostered loyalty. The challenge was convincing others to see it that way. On Monday morning, Michael called an emergency meeting with his executive team. When the group gathered in the sleek conference room overlooking the city skyline, there was an air of curiosity. Emergency meetings were rare and no one knew what to expect. As Michael stood at the head of the table, his expression was unusually serious. "I need your full attention today," he began, setting down a folder filled with charts and graphs. "Over the past few weeks, I've come to realize something troubling about our company and ourselves as leaders. We talk a lot about innovation, growth, and excellence, but we've been blind to the struggles of the very people who make all of this possible." The room fell silent as Michael shared Sarah's story, not naming her directly, but painting a vivid picture of her dedication, sacrifices, and hardships. He explained how her situation wasn't unique. Dozens, if not hundreds, of employees were likely facing similar challenges. To illustrate his point, he presented the data he'd gathered from HR, highlighting disparities in pay, lack of financial safety nets, and the prevalence of burnout among staff. "This isn't acceptable," Michael said firmly, his voice rising slightly. "We're failing our people, and if we don't fix this, we're failing as a company." Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others exchanged skeptical glances. One senior manager raised his hand cautiously. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand your concern, but implementing widespread changes will require significant investment. Are we prepared for that?" Michael nodded, anticipating resistance. "Yes, it will cost money, but consider the alternative. Losing talented employees because they're stretched too thin, seeing morale plummet, and damaging our reputation as an employer of choice. Investing in our people isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do." To drive his point home, Michael proposed several sweeping reforms. First, he suggested raising the minimum wage for all employees to ensure no one had to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table. Second, he advocated for creating an emergency assistance fund to help employees facing unexpected crises, such as medical emergencies or natural disasters. Third, he pushed for expanding paid family leave and offering free mental health resources to support overall well-being. Finally, he recommended conducting regular reviews of compensation packages to ensure fairness and competitiveness. Predictably, not everyone was on board immediately. Some argued that the costs would strain the budget, while others worried about setting unrealistic expectations. But Michael countered passionately, using real-life examples to highlight the human impact of these changes. "Think about Sarah," he urged. "She works double shifts, takes care of her family, and still manages to exceed expectations at work. Shouldn't we reward that kind of commitment? Or are we content letting her struggle silently until she burns out?" Slowly, the tide began to turn. A few executives admitted they hadn't fully grasped the extent of the problem before now. Others acknowledged that addressing these issues could improve retention rates and boost productivity. By the end of the meeting, the team agreed to move forward with Michael's proposals, albeit cautiously. In the weeks that followed, the company rolled out its new initiatives. Employees received emails announcing the changes, along with heartfelt messages from Michael emphasizing the importance of supporting one another. At first, reactions were mixed. Some expressed gratitude, calling the moves life-changing. Others remained skeptical, wondering if the promises would translate into action. But over time, the positive effects became undeniable. For Sarah, the changes came just in time. She received a long-overdue promotion and raise, allowing her to breathe easier financially. With the extra income, she was able to catch up on bills, buy new clothes for her kids, and even take a much-needed vacation, a luxury she hadn't indulged in years. Though she remained humble, she thanked Michael privately, calling his actions a miracle. As for Michael, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Walking through the office halls, he noticed subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Employees seemed more relaxed, more engaged, and more willing to share ideas. Conversations around the water cooler were lighthearted, and smiles came more easily. For the first time in years, Michael felt truly connected to the heartbeat of the company, the people who made it tick. Looking back on that fateful evening when he overheard Sarah's quiet request for food, Michael realized it wasn't just a turning point for her. It was a catalyst for transformation. Sometimes true leadership means stepping outside your comfort zone to see the world through someone else's eyes. And in doing so, you might just discover a path toward meaningful change. The changes Michael implemented rippled through the company like a wave, touching every corner of its vast ecosystem. At first, there were whispers, some curious, others cautious, but soon those murmurs turned into conversations that echoed, in break rooms, hallways, and even virtual meetings. Employees who had felt invisible for years suddenly found themselves noticed, valued, and supported. It wasn't just about the new policies. It was about the message they carried. You matter. For Sarah, the transformation was profound. The raise she received didn't just ease her financial burdens, it gave her hope. For the first time in years, she could look ahead without constantly worrying about how to stretch her paycheck. She used the extra money to pay off lingering medical bills, replace her worn-out shoes, and enroll her children in after-school programs they'd been eyeing for months. On weekends, instead of counting coins to decide between groceries or utilities, she took her kids to the park, a simple joy she hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. But perhaps the most significant change came from within herself. Before, Sarah had always believed that success meant enduring hardship silently, keeping her struggles hidden behind a professional mask. Now she realized that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was strength. When Michael acknowledged her hard work and advocated for systemic change, he validated something deeper than her contributions to the company, her humanity. And that realization empowered her to speak up more confidently, both at work and in her personal life. Sarah wasn't alone in experiencing this shift. Across departments, employees began to feel a renewed sense of purpose. Those who had once feared asking for help now approached HR with requests for counseling services or emergency assistance. Managers started checking in regularly with their teams, not just about deadlines but also about well-being. Even small gestures like offering flexible hours or recognizing someone's effort during team meetings created a culture of care that spread organically. One afternoon, as Michael walked through the office, he overheard two junior employees chatting near the coffee machine. One of them said, "Did you hear about the emergency fund? My mom got sick last month and I didn't know how I'd cover the hospital bills. But because of the fund, I didn't have to dip into my savings. Honestly, it saved me." Michael paused, pretending to scroll through his phone while listening. His heart swelled with pride, not because he had personally solved the problem, but because the system he helped create was making a tangible difference. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. They were stories of real people whose lives were improving. Of course, not everything went smoothly. Some executives grumbled about the initial costs of implementing the reforms, and a few veteran employees expressed skepticism, fearing that the changes might be temporary. But as the months passed, the results spoke for themselves. Employee retention rates soared, productivity increased, and morale reached levels the company hadn't seen in years. Surveys showed that workers felt more connected to the organization's mission and trusted leadership more than ever before. During one particularly memorable town hall meeting, Michael stood before hundreds of employees, many of whom were tuning in remotely. He opened by thanking everyone for their hard work and dedication, then shared a story, this time naming Sarah directly, with her permission. He recounted his visit to her apartment, describing the humility and resilience she displayed despite overwhelming challenges. By the end of his speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, colleagues approached Sarah to congratulate her, some admitting they had no idea what she had been going through. Far from feeling embarrassed, Sarah embraced the moment. "I'm not special," she told them with a smile. "There are so many of us out there doing our best. What matters is that we're starting to take care of each other." As the months turned into years, the ripple effects of Michael's decision continued to grow. The company became known as an employer of choice, attracting top talent from across the industry. Media outlets praised its progressive policies, and competitors scrambled to adopt similar initiatives. Internally, the workplace culture evolved into one defined by empathy, collaboration, and mutual respect. Michael often reflected on how far they had come since that chilly Saturday morning when he visited Sarah's apartment. What began as a single act of curiosity had transformed into a movement that reshaped the entire organization. Looking back, he realized that leadership wasn't just about steering the ship. It was about ensuring everyone on board had the tools and support they needed to thrive. Years later, as Michael prepared to step down from his role as CEO, he penned a letter to the company's future leaders. In it, he wrote, "When I first walked into Sarah's home, I saw not just her struggles but the reflection of my own blind spots as a leader. Her courage inspired me to see beyond titles, roles, and profit margins, to recognize the human beings behind the work." True success isn't measured by quarterly earnings or stock prices. It's measured by the lives we touch and the legacy we leave behind. Never underestimate the power of compassion. Sometimes all it takes is one person choosing to listen and act for everything to change. On his final day, the entire company gathered to celebrate Michael's tenure. As he stood on stage, flanked by executives and employees alike, Sarah stepped forward to present him with a gift, a framed drawing made by her youngest child. It depicted a tall figure shaking hands with a smaller one, surrounded by bright sunflowers, and the words, "Thank you for seeing us." Tears welled up in Michael's eyes as he accepted the gift. He hugged Sarah tightly, whispering, "No, thank you. You taught me what it means to lead with heart." And as the applause filled the room, Michael knew one thing for certain. The journey wasn't over. It never would be. Because in the end, the greatest achievements weren't built on profits or accolades. They were built on connections, kindness, and the unwavering belief that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and valued.